Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Counselor Workshops. We are so glad that you are with us today and very sad that we are not doing this workshop in person like we have in the past. But we do hope that this presents you an opportunity to gain the financial aid knowledge that you need to help your students, and also hoping that this presents an opportunity for more of our colleagues to participate in this virtual mode. My name is Faith Phillips, and I'm the Director of Student Financial Services at Central Ohio Technical College and the Ohio State University at Newark. I will be your host and your presenter today, and assisting me is Vicki DeLucas from Ohio University at Zanesville. Throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, we ask that you put your question in the chat box, and Vicki will be monitoring the chat box and let me know when there are questions that need to be asked and answered. You are all in listen only mode, so you will not be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. So if you have any concerns or questions that you need to address, please put those in the chat box. This presentation is also being recorded and will soon be posted to the OASFA website for you to listen to again. But we will not post it until after the December 9th webinar. That would be our last presentation. We will also at that time upload the handout that correlates with this presentation that we are giving you today. So feel free to snap pictures of it as we go through the process, screenshot it as you need. We will again upload the presentation with the recorded webinar after December 9th. Also, a certificate of attendance will be available for you after you have attended the entire session by emailing us at outreach@oasfa.org, and you will see that email address in just a second on the screen. But when the presentation is over, if you send an email to outreach@oasfa.org and request a certificate, we will send one out to you. So let's get started. About this presentation in OASFA. OASFA is the Ohio Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and we are a nonprofit organization made up of financial aid professionals. And the OASFA Outreach Committee is an all-volunteer committee, a part of OASFA, that serves as the primary resource for pertinent and current financial aid information. This committee disseminates this information through a variety of activities, such as this training program. OASFA is providing this information to you as a free service. You also have permission to copy and distribute any materials that you receive through OASFA, and you may not charge your recipients for those materials. So the permission has been granted, but please do not charge participants for that material. Should you have any questions that you need assistance with, please feel free to reach out to the OASFA Outreach Committee at the outreach@oasfa.org. So here is our agenda today. We will be talking about FAFSA updates, which thankfully there are few. We will be talking about the federal verification process and what that entails, because we know that students will start to receive those notifications while they are still in high school and probably will come in and see you and ask for guidance on how to fill out these verification materials. We will also talk about financial aid award letters and compare some different types of award letters. And more than ever, we will be talking about special circumstances, because we know with this current pandemic, we are going to have a lot of students and parents reaching out to us regarding special circumstances, mostly related to income loss. We will talk about federal aid programs and updates related to those, as well as state aid, and then other resources that are available to you through OASFA and federal student aid. So let's start talking about the FAFSA updates for 2021 and 2022. I will apologize now. When you start talking about 21, 22, or any year right now, it is very complicated with all of the twos. So hopefully you'll just read the screen and see the year I'm speaking about versus the number I may actually say. So let's talk about the Federal Student Aid ID. This is something we want families to obtain prior to starting the process for filing their FAFSA form. The FSA ID is basically the legal signature or the electronic signature for the student and their parent to sign the FAFSA form. They can apply for the FSA ID by going to the website on the screen, fsaid.ed.gov. The student and only one parent whose information will be on the FAFSA form needs to request an FSA ID. And so I will use the example of a family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 children. When you are applying for an FSA ID, only one of those parents needs an FSA ID electronic signature, and the student that they're filing the FAFSA for will need an FSA ID. If 2 students are in college at the same time, each student needs their own FAFSA and their own FSA ID. But the parent who requests the FSA ID can use their same signature for both students' FAFSA forms. And again, the FSA ID, we ask you to encourage your families to request the FSA ID prior to beginning the FAFSA because it will speed up their process and make it a little bit smoother for them. When requesting the FSA ID, it will ask for an email address or a mobile phone number, and we encourage families to use both. When they report the email address and the mobile phone number, they will be sent a code in that email and in that cell phone number or in that and as a text message that they will take back to their application to verify who they are. The email address and mobile phone numbers can only be used one time and associated with one FSA ID. So tell families don't think that you can use mom and dad's email address and cell phone for both the parent and the student FSA ID. Students and parents with recycled cell phone numbers, which they may not know that, but we've been using the FSA ID long enough now that if someone has given up a cell phone number and now the student that's applying for an FSA ID is trying to use that mobile phone number, the system may tell them that that number has already been used. And so if that is the case, they will have to reach out to FSA to let them know that they now own that cell phone number, that mobile phone number, and work with FSA specialists to correct that. We also want you to tell students and parents not to use the student's high school email address because that typically is deleted after they graduate from high school. So we encourage students, if they have not already set up a Yahoo or a Gmail account, that this is now the time that they want to create that email account. They will want to use that for their admissions applications as well as for their FAFSA form. So this is the FAFSA on the web screenshot. We encourage all families to file their FAFSA using FAFSA on the web rather than a paper application because it does speed up the process doing it electronically. It has edits that built into it to help them prevent from making certain mistakes. And so the websites have changed a little bit. You can still go to FAFSA.gov and get to the FAFSA form, but students will also can go to studentaid.gov and click on apply for aid, and it will take them to starting the FAFSA process. So logging in the first time, they will click start here, and then once they've identified themselves within the FAFSA system, they will log in from that point forward. FAFSA updates. So for any of you that have been in and around the financial aid process for many years, you know that there were several years where the FAFSA was constantly changing. And thankfully for the last several years, we have not had a lot of FAFSA updates. So changes for 21, 22, one of them is just basically the way that the Schedule 1 question is processed on the FAFSA form. So the Schedule 1 related to the family's federal tax return. So the answer to, did your parent file a Schedule 1 with IRS Form 1040 in the parent financial section? And the answer is now, did you file a Schedule 1 in the student financial section? So, and it can also now be transferred by the IRS through the IRS data retrieval tool. So students and parents, if they use the data retrieval tool, will see the answer to that question, did you file the Schedule 1, will be populated and say transferred from the IRS. For those who do not use the data retrieval tool, the help topics connected to the Schedule 1 question have been updated to include current exceptions such as capital gains, and has removed an exception, and virtual currency has been added. And I did not know what virtual currency is, and that actually is Bitcoin. So those are the main updates to the FAFSA form. Also, for families with an income of $27,000 or less, could meet the income threshold for the automatic zero EFC. So for families with a 2019 income of 27,000 or less, they will qualify for auto zero EFC, and the FAFSA will skip certain questions on the form that will make their result be a zero family contribution. A couple of line item changes on the taxes occurred, but it did not change the FAFSA questions. And the questions regarding untaxed portions of IRAs and untaxed portions of pensions is no longer combined. So basically, it's just the wording is different. We want you to encourage all of your families to please try to use the IRS data retrieval tool. We know that it's overwhelming for families to think about leaving FAFSA and going over to the IRS and bringing the data in, but we know that it will reduce their data entry, their ability to make mistakes in their data entry process. And if they're selected for verification, it reduces the amount of documentation they have to provide to the school. And we also find that if they use the data retrieval tool, that may reduce the fact that they get selected for that process called verification. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's just talk about FAFSA completion numbers. So nationally, the class of 2020, so the previous class that graduated this past spring, their FAFSA numbers as of September 11th were down by about 4.2% compared to the class of 2019. And it is reasonable to expect that those numbers are down related to the pandemic and students getting off track in March, April, and May in that process of getting their FAFSAs done in time to enter college. We also know that some postpone heading into post-secondary education programs as a result of the pandemic. So some have taken that gap year just because they weren't quite ready to face going to college in this very unknown and remote setting. Only one state saw an increase this year, and that was Hawaii. And then looking at the Ohio class of 2020, we were also down, actually a little lower than the national average. We were down by about 5.7% as of September 11th. So that equates to about 4,700 less Ohio seniors filed their FAFSA form. We also know, however, that Ohio was ranked 15th in the highest completion rates in the country, with 64.3% of the class of 2020 filing a FAFSA. So while our numbers were down, we still rank very high in FAFSA completions. And a lot of that is thanks to you, the counselors and access programs and financial aid administrators, for helping get that message out to families about the importance of filing the FAFSA form and getting that FAFSA completed. So even in this trying time and going remote from your high schools in March, you still were able to get students to get those FAFSAs submitted. Also good news, Ohio gained 6.7% in new completed FAFSAs between June 30th and September 11th. So again, this is for the class of 2020. And this is not surprising either. So those families that sort of got off track when the pandemic started regained ground between June and September in getting those FAFSAs done, in getting ready to start college this past fall. So at least they did make some ground and recover from that. Ohio received 3.3% fewer FAFSAs from all students, which includes new and returning students. So again, we were still down when you compare all FAFSAs filed in the state of Ohio. FAFSA completion is a strong indicator of the likelihood that a student will enroll. So with FAFSA numbers down, and again, we're talking about the 2020-21 year, the year that the students are currently enrolled in. With FAFSA numbers down, we can expect that enrollment numbers will be down. And it's still early since fall semester just started in August and September in most schools. But we also think that we will see a national enrollment numbers fall. And again, mostly related to the pandemic. But we anticipate that those enrollment numbers will increase as students become more accustomed to this current environment and the unknown of how long this will last. So here is breaking out again we're looking at the 2021 cycle of freshmen. These are students that how many schools did they list on their FAFSA? So for new filers, about 21% listed 2 to 4 schools, about 22% listed 5 or more schools, but about 56.9% of students in 2021 knew where they were planning to go. They were an impressive group of students that, as an incoming freshman, knew exactly where they wanted to go, and they only listed one school on their FAFSA form. For all filers, so this includes incoming students as well as continuing students. Obviously, one school listed was the highest percentage at 78%, because we know that when students refile for financial aid each year, they typically stay at the same college, so they only list one school on their FAFSA form. The fact that we have continuing students also listing 5 or more schools could be students that were considering transferring mid-year, or it could have been students that are planning to finish their bachelor's degree, say mid-year, and maybe transferring to another school to pursue their master's degree. So those percentages are not alarming at all, make complete sense. All right, so if you are not aware, you as counselors have the ability to track FAFSA completion numbers. And so there are different ways that you can access this information and can track the activity of your students and how they file their FAFSA form. So NCAN puts out this formyourfuture.org/FAFSA tracker, and this is the big national snapshot that is updated every week. So for 21-22 FAFSAs, which opened October 1st, you in the high schools can log in here and look at the national, state, city, district, and even down to specific schools to see the number of FAFSAs that are being filed. So if you want to compare trends and see how well your high school is doing compared to another high school, or how well is your district doing compared to other districts in Ohio, or how are we compared to the national submission of FAFSA forms, you can log into the Form Your Future FAFSA tracker and compare. You also can compare this year versus last year at that same level. Also, you can look into student level data through the state of Ohio, and the website is listed here on the screen. This is most useful for counselors to know what is happening with your specific students. You can actually print out a list of students that are on your roster who have completed the FAFSA form. However, in order to get access to that data, you need to have a data sharing agreement signed by your school's superintendent. So you can log into this website and see if your school's superintendent has signed this agreement, and if not, you could work toward getting that agreement signed. This will help you know who of your students have actually submitted the FAFSA form, and you know who to target that still needs to get that FAFSA submitted. The site indicates that 21-22 FAFSA data will be available in early October. It should be available now since the FAFSA was turned on October the 1st. So we strongly encourage districts to access this information so that you know where your students are with the FAFSA process. Many enhancements have been done this past spring by the state of Ohio through this site. It is more user-friendly, has more student data, and will allow you again to outreach to your students. This is another view of the Form Your Future FAFSA tracker. So you can see down there, Ohio, as I said earlier, was ranked 15th in the state, and you can move this around and change the view and the information that you want to see and compare. All right. So let's shift gears into the federal verification process. So we know that verification can be a lot of work for students, especially for students that are applying to multiple schools. Verification is a process where the federal student aid has randomly selects FAFSAs and sends it to the colleges and say, you need to verify that this student and their parents filed the FAFSA properly. And so the student will know they've been selected for verification when they read their student aid report. It will tell them in the comment section, it will say, you have been selected for a process called verification. Your school will be reaching out to you to let you know what documents they need. The School then will reach out to them and tell them you've been processed or selected and tell them what the verification process is. If your high school students are applying to multiple schools and they are selected for verification, they will, in most cases, need to complete that verification process at all of those schools, and in some cases to see that financial aid offer. Some schools will send an offer with pending verification so they can get an idea of what their aid would look like before they complete verification, but it will have a clarifier in there that says these awards are pending the completion of verification. So if some students are waiting to see what their financial aid offers are before they go through that verification process at all schools, they may not get an award offer until they complete that verification process. Roughly 22% of FAFSAs are selected for verification by the Department of Education. And again, it is a random selection. It is not FSA or the colleges picking on families. We have some families that get upset thinking that we're accusing them of providing inaccurate information. That is not at all what it is. It's basically just an audit of the FAFSAs to make sure that the families put the correct information on there and that the federal funds are getting to the appropriate students in the appropriate amounts from the appropriate funds. When students are selected for verification, we want them to respond as quickly as possible to the request, because the faster they get the information to us, the faster we can finish the review process and get final award offers out to them. We know that freshmen are trying to make, incoming freshmen, so high schools and seniors right now, are trying to make decisions about where to go, and they want to see those financial aid offers. And so the sooner they can get their verification information to us, the sooner we can get those complete offers out to them. Again, using the data retrieval tool will decrease the number of students that are selected for verification, and it will also decrease the amount of documentation that the student may have to provide to the schools. If they are selected for verification, some of the common documents we will request, one of them will be a verification worksheet, and these can look different across colleges. So if a student takes a verification form that they've received from three different schools, it should look similar, but it will look a little bit different. The verbiage may be slightly different, the logos will be different, the references will be different. But that is one of the most common forms that are sent out, is a verification worksheet where we ask them to list the people in their household by name so that we're verifying that the number they reported on the FAFSA matches the people and that they put the right people in the household number. Another common document that we will ask for is the federal tax return transcript or a copy of their federal tax return. So the FAFSA for 21-22 will be asking families to report their 2019 federal tax information. So we will be asking them, if selected for verification, for a copy of their federal tax return transcript or tax return for 2019. So an alternative, of course, to submitting those taxes would be completing that IRS data retrieval. If a family member, a parent, or a student states that they did not file taxes in 2019, but they are selected for verification, then they could be asked to provide a copy of their W-2s or 1099s that correlate with the income that they reported on the FAFSA form. Also, if the parent or an independent student states that they did not file and were not required to file a 2019 tax return and they're selected for verification, they will be requested to provide to the college's financial aid office a verification of non-filing letter. So basically, they're reaching out to the IRS to get a statement that says this person did not file a federal tax return and was not required to file a federal tax return. This documentation has been a bit of a challenge during the pandemic because the IRS employees have also been working remotely. So there has been a delay in families requesting paper documents to be sent to them so they can send them to the school. So if a family can complete these requests online at the IRS website, they may receive that information sooner rather than later. So institutions may accept a copy of the federal tax return as opposed to a tax return transcript. So a few years ago, all we were allowed to accept was a tax return transcript. And due to some other issues, we have now been given the authority to go back to collecting tax returns. But families need to sign the federal tax return before they provide it to the college. And again, we're using 2019 for the 21-22 tax filers. If they don't have a copy of their tax return, they can go to the IRS website and request a tax return transcript. They can do via an online account creation. They can no longer have a tax transcript mailed to a third party. So oftentimes they would go in, and instead of having the tax transcript sent to them at their house and then them having to forward it to the college, they used to put the college's web address in there, and they can no longer do that. It has to go directly to the tax filer. If a family member, a parent or a student says they will file a 2019 tax return, so the tax date has passed, so it was extended to July 15th to file 2019 taxes, and you were allowed to request an extension, but that needed to be filed in October. So there should be very few people that have not filed their 2019 taxes, but if they do, they will likely be selected for verification, and the student must verify that the parent or student has ultimately filed. Schools are only permitted to accept extensions beyond that 6-month extension for families that fall under the HEROES Act, or they get an IRS letter of approval for extension beyond that 6 months. So if a family has been selected for verification and they have not filed their 2019 taxes, they have to provide documentation that they either fall under the HEROES Act or that they received an extension. Otherwise, the college's financial aid office will not be able to move forward with financial aid offers until the family files their 2019 tax return. Also, as a note, we've been talking about students that are selected by a federal student aid or the federal processor, but a school may choose to institutionally select a student. So the student may get their FAFSA results, their student aid report, and it doesn't indicate on there anywhere that they've been selected for verification by federal student aid. But schools, when we receive the FAFSA, are required to review each one. And if we see something on there that appears it might be conflicting or information that we need to make sure is accurate, the school has the authority to select the student for verification. And we could come out and request a specific document to meet that verification requirement. So just because a student isn't selected through the federal student aid process, they may still be selected at the school level. And students may never be selected throughout their entire college career, and some students get selected every 4 years. It is a random selection, but we want students and parents to understand we're not picking on them. We're not saying they did anything wrong. It is just an audit of random FAFSAs to make sure that the FAFSAs were filed properly. This one makes me laugh, but financial aid administrators are told by federal student aid that we are not required to be tax experts. However, we are required to understand who is required to file a federal tax return, and we're required to verify that they filed properly. So we do frustrate some families when they give us their tax information and they say, for example, filed as head of household. And based on the information they provided to us, we've determined that they did not meet the qualifications to file as under head of household. And so we have the authority to request a student or a parent to refile or amend their tax return to be accurate. And so we need to let families know that while we aren't tax experts, we are required to know a little bit about the tax filing process, and we can come back and ask them to refile their taxes. And until the college receives the requested information, financial aid eligibility either cannot be determined or an offer will be estimated and will not disperse to a student's account until they have complied with the full verification requirement. All right, shifting gears again, let's talk about financial aid offers. The question is, why are aid offers so confusing? And that is because each college and university can use a different delivery method. There is not a right or wrong way to do an award letter. There is not a lot of guidance given to the colleges, or actually mandates from FSA, on how an award letter has to look and the mode in which it's delivered to the students. So you probably already are well aware of that. You've seen paper versions, you've seen email versions, you've seen online portal versions. Each school has the right to send the award notification in whatever format they want to. And schools, as you know, rarely use the same template or layout. And then we make it even more confusing because we don't use the same language. So sometimes you will see a subloan, a direct subloan, a federal direct subsidized loan. There is not a difference between those, just the number of characters and the way in which we've referenced it. And sometimes schools are limited by their systems and the award letter template in how many characters we can use. So that is often why you don't see federal direct subsidized loan always spelled out. You see subloan, which what does that mean to a student? So we recognize that there are multiple ways in which financial aid award can come out to students. The other question we get are, are these awards automatically accepted, or am I required to take an additional action on it? And if I do, how do I do that, and where do I do that? How clear are these parameters on the letters when we send them to the students? And does the school provide the information on the letter, or is there supplemental documentation with guidance? And so a lot of schools will send out these beautiful brochures with these pamphlets with their award offer in there and pictures of their campus and great detailed information. Some of us will send an email that says that your award offer is available on our school portal. And then on the school portal is where we tell them what their next steps are and what awards are accepted and what awards do they need to take action on. So it puts a lot of work and responsibility on the student and parent to read the award offers carefully, whether it's on paper or it is in a school portal, to know what steps do I have to do in order to accept and receive this financial aid. And then how do schools deal with federal work study? Federal work study will show up on an award offer, but it is not fun. They are not funds that are dispersed to the student's billing account. That's money that the student has to earn. So how does the school separate or not separate that out and make it clear to a student that that's money they have to earn? And do all schools put a Parent Plus loan offer out there? They don't. Some schools put it out there so that the family can see every option they have, and other schools just put out there the very minimum that the student needs in order to pay tuition fees and housing. And then private education loans, are those listed on award offers? Again, it depends on the school. And then does the letter show charges, like an estimation of what tuition and fees, books and housing will look like? Or do they do direct charges, which are those that are billed by the school, so tuition fees and housing? Or do they do direct and indirect charges, tuition fees, housing, an estimation for books? So these are all the things that make these award letters more confusing. So let's look at a couple different types of award letters from two different types of institutions with two very different types of layouts. And I know this is hard to see on the screen, and we're going to break these out in pieces and parts in the next several slides. But this slide illustrates the difference between two award offers. The letter on the left is from a four-year public institution, and the one on the right is modeled after an award letter at a private institution. Let's break them down and show that even though they are, they largely give the same information, they are laid out in very different ways. And both have pros and cons to them. The first, the public, is not nearly as busy, and it does a really good job of spelling out the estimated cost of attendance through an itemized list. The second one is really kind of busy, but it breaks out the information in a segmented manner, making it easier to discern the different types of aid and how much the student is receiving. It does not, however, do a good job of spelling out the cost of attendance. So let's break it down even further. So this is showing the different types of gift aid on each of the award offers. The gift aid is that free aid. It is exactly what it says. It's gift money that the student doesn't have to pay back and typically has little to no strings attached to it. And as long as the student fulfills requirements, they don't have to pay it back. So on the first one, you can see where they call it scholar. My guess is it's a scholarship. And then you see the words grant. So those are words that the student may not understand, but those words typically mean free money that the student doesn't have to pay back. Scholarships tend to be given due to academics or some sort of special talent, such as athletics or band, and can be given by the school themselves or by an outside third party. So when a student receives their first offer, say in maybe February or March, they probably are only going to see federal, state, and institutional aid. But throughout the spring and into the summer, colleges will start to receive those outside scholarships from third parties, such as your local PTA scholarship gets sent to the school to get applied to the student's account. You will start to see these award offers change, and you'll see those those third-party scholarships be listed on their award notifications in some fashion. Grants, however, are largely based on need and are usually determined by some type of application, which is usually the FAFSA form or the CSS profile form. So we, kind of sidestepping here a second, in encouraging all families to file the FAFSA no matter what. So we know at the very minimum, every student is eligible for a federal student loan. And we don't want students to take out loans that they do not need. But we also don't want them to not file the FAFSA and miss out on the opportunity to receive especially institutional scholarships and grants simply because they didn't take the time to file that FAFSA form. So that's just another plug to reiterate why we want families to submit that FAFSA form every year. So this is the two examples for these award offers on how they reference federal student loans. Federal student loans are provided by the government and have to be paid back with interest, and the student has to complete the FAFSA in order to be eligible. And as I said before, every single student, no matter what parent's income is, even if it's $1 million, will be offered a federal student loan, but they must file that FAFSA in order to be offered it. The big challenge is often that schools will use these different type of phrases, as we talked about a few minutes ago, to identify the different types of loans. So you can see on the top one here, it says federal unsubsidized loan and federal subsidized loan, but in the bottom one, it says federal direct subsidized student loan, federal direct unsubsidized student loan. They're the exact same thing. It's just, one of the schools probably didn't have the space up there to put the federal or put the direct between federal and subsidized. And as we showed earlier, sometimes you may only see sub loan. But deep down, either in the award paper information that was mailed to the family or on the school's website, it will explain what the difference is between a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan. Then you will see work study and perhaps credit-based loan options. If the student is eligible for work study and they've indicated that they're interested in work study, they may see an offer for work study. To qualify for work study, though, the student has to complete the FAFSA form. In most schools, there's a question on there on the FAFSA that says, are you interested in work? And some schools, if the student doesn't answer that question or says no, won't offer federal work study. So we like students to say yes to that question on the FAFSA form. They can always decline the work study if they don't need it when it's been offered to them. Please remember that work study funds are not applied to the student's bill. They are paid to the student via a paycheck. So even though they show on the award offer, they are not deducted from the student's bill. And hopefully all of our award offers are out there explaining to the student that that is not money, that $1,500 that you see on that first offer there, they should not be deducting $1,500 when they look at what their bill is, because that will not be applied directly to their student bill. Also, schools may offer a Parent Plus loan or the option to borrow a private education loan. And these are often put on there as a way to meet that gap of what the other grants and scholarships won't cover in the cost of attendance. The Parent Plus loan is a federal loan program where the loan is in the parent's name and the parent is solely responsible for that loan. It has fixed interest rate and a few different repayment terms. But again, it's a loan and it is in the parent's name. And then private education loans are education loans through a private lender. They are not through the federal government and through the federal aid process. And generally speaking, the student is the primary borrower with a co-signer being required. They tend to have fixed or variable interest rates and different repayment terms, and that those vary based on the lender that the student selects. Not all schools put private education loans out there because we don't want to encourage the student to borrow more than they need. But at higher cost educational institutions, sometimes the private education loan or the parent loan is a necessity. And then here is a comparison of the estimated cost of attendance on each of these award offers. So you can see the top one there. They look similar, but they share different information. So the top one breaks it down into the tuition and fees, and they break it down by fall and spring, and then a total. And then any program fees that may be attached. So that student may be in the nursing program, and they have an additional program fee. And then it tells them what their room and board is, their books, and an estimation for transportation, miscellaneous, and personal expenses. It does a really good job in that first example of spelling out the estimate for each individual expense, while the second one only gives you direct expenses. And it has an asterisk telling them that there is an additional $2,000 or $3,000 of indirect expenses that are not accounted for on the offer sheet, but it doesn't really tell them what those expenses are. So they're just telling them we recommend that you allocate that. Again, pros and cons to each of these. The first does a really good job of letting you know all of your expenses, but also represents work study as money that may be applied to your bill, which is not the case. So it could be confusing when you see that on there. The second does a better job. Oops, I'm actually talking about, I got off track there on cost of attendance. But you can see here where each one does a different job. The second one here will tell you about paying without loans. So how can you make this work without loans? And then if you borrow the student loan, which is $5,500 for the year, what the balance is after a student borrows. So it does a really good job of telling the student, you know, if you can afford the $11,385 for the year, you wouldn't even need to borrow your student loan because you have enough in grants and scholarships. Sorry about getting off track there. So OASFA provides you with a comparison tool, just a great free tool that's available on our website to help families break out each college offer. So feel free to go to the oasfa.org website and pull this off if you're working with a family that's trying to compare the different colleges. We occasionally get questions from counselors or families about the ability to negotiate financial aid offers with different colleges and universities. And while most institutions typically award their best financial aid offer up front with little to room for negotiation, there could be some options for some families at different institutions in terms of receiving an updated award offer, especially talking about special circumstance appeals. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But also talking to the college's financial aid office about, you know, are there any other institutional scholarships or grants that I can be considered for? So while negotiating for a better financial aid package is probably not happening at most schools, it can never hurt for a student to reach out to the financial aid office or their admissions representative to say, I just need a little bit more. Are there any other options for me in order to make this work? All right, let's move in then to the special circumstances. So as I mentioned earlier, colleges and universities recognize as families are filing the 21-22 FAFSA form, they're reporting their 2019 tax information. And we recognize now more than ever that that income in 2019 may not be indicative of their income for the current year, especially related to the pandemic. So aside from the pandemic, colleges and universities have always had the authority to look at a student's special circumstances. But now more than ever, we want families to understand that they need to let the colleges and universities know if they are experiencing something different in their circumstances. So families are required to file the FAFSA as it directs. So eligibility for aid for the 21-22 year is based on 19 tax year, and they still need to file the FAFSA using their 2019 tax information. But to recognize that families' 19 income may not be indicative of their ability to pay for college educational expenses, financial aid administrators may evaluate on a case-by-case basis with documentation what would better reflect the family's financial picture. Financial circumstances are conditions that exist that cannot be explained on the FAFSA. And again, the biggest one we usually see and we expect to see in the next year is a loss or reduction of employment. But we also see loss of untaxed income, such as child support. So we know that child support is usually ended when a student turns 18 or graduates from high school. But when they file their FAFSA, they'll be listing how much child support the parent received in 2019. So that would be an appealable factor that they could reach out to the college's financial aid office and document. And if the school feels necessary, would reprocess the FAFSA and hopefully reduce that family contribution and make the student eligible for more financial aid. We also recognize that separation, divorce, and unfortunately death can occur after a FAFSA has been submitted. So they may get that FAFSA submitted in October, but come January, something else has changed, and they would need to reach out to the school's financial aid office to let them know what that circumstance is. If the student is applying to multiple universities, they will need to approach each financial aid office separately regarding the appeal process. So if at my institution I approve an income appeal, I will reprocess the FAFSA that will benefit my institution and the student at my institution. But if they're also looking at Ohio University, they would have to approach Vicky as well and do the income appeal at Vicky's school and get the results of the appeal done there. So if the student, again, is looking at multiple universities and they want to get a comparison of their award offers reflecting their special circumstances, they will have to go through the appeal process at all of the schools that they are applying to. So again, most schools have an appeal process to address these special circumstances. I will go out on a limb and say that most of us aren't quite ready to start looking at those. So even though the FAFSA came out October 1st, if a student were to reach out to me and say for COTC or for Ohio State, I need to do an income appeal because I lost income in 2020, we're not quite ready at OSU or at COTC to start looking at those appeal forms. And we'll explain that to them and we'll ask them to check back with us usually after the first of the year when we have those appeal forms ready and we're ready to start looking at that information. But what the student will be asked to provide on the appeal form is an explanation of their change of circumstances and the documentation that will support their statement, such as a layoff or a termination letter. We like when it happens after the end of the year. So after they approach us in, for example, 2021 to say, I lost income in 2020, most schools will ask them to at least provide their W-2s or their final pay stub for 2020 so that we can get an actual figure for 2020 to compare it to 2019 income. And some schools may wait until a family has filed their 2020 tax return and ask for that. We still would have time to make adjustments to an aid offer, even if we wait for tax returns to be filed for 2020. So just, tell families that are talking to you about these special circumstances to be prepared that it won't be an instantaneous process, but that schools will be prepared to address and review and look at estimated of future or current income. The college will review and determine if the change will impact the student's eligibility and will update the FAFSA as appropriate. So we have the authority to go in and make changes to, for example, those income figures, because we'll be flagging the FAFSA to say that we made a correction on it, that we did an override to the data. Again, as I said, if they're applying to more than one college, they will need to appeal at each university. The decision is final and as at the discretion of the financial aid office. So if the appeal form, for whatever reason, is not approved or not taken into consideration at my college, the student cannot appeal to the U.S. Department of Education my decision. And with income appeals, it doesn't happen very often where one school will do it and one school won't. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, schools are being asked by federal student aid to be a little bit more lenient and supportive of this. And we are preparing for an increase in the number of appeals that we will see based on loss of income in 2020. If a student has been selected for verification when their FAFSA is processed and they are looking at doing a special circumstance appeal, they will need to complete that verification process before the income appeal can be done. So if they have been selected for verification, the school has to verify that the information was filed properly to begin with on the FAFSA, and then we can process the special circumstance. Some schools will go ahead and select the student if they weren't selected for verification if they submit a special circumstance appeal, because sometimes we do a special circumstance appeal and we submit the FAFSA for a correction and then it comes back selected for verification. So some schools have just started with, let's just complete verification and make sure the FAFSA was filed properly to begin with, and then let's move into what is your special circumstance, your income appeal, and let's review that. Well, the FAFSA for 21-22 became available on October 1st. Again, financial aid offices may not be prepared yet to do the income appeal. So you can have students reach out to the financial aid office or have them monitor the school's website. So if you go out onto Ohio State's website, for example, and you go under forms, you will see forms out there for 2021, but you won't see that we have forms out there yet for 21-22. So I will just direct families to that website and say, just keep monitoring it or reach out to us, the first of the year. And that's when we will be more prepared to review those special circumstances appeals. There is a free resource to assist families in writing their special circumstance appeal. It's called formswift.com/swift-student. And you can take a picture of that screen if you would like. We have found that students and parents like this website because it helps them put into the right words what they're trying to express to the colleges and universities regarding their special circumstances. And this is just a quick summary of different special circumstances. So we've talked about loss of child support, we've talked about divorce or death of a parent or a spouse, and loss of income. But another one that we occasionally see are families that come to us that are dealing with a very unusual medical circumstance, or we've seen some students who have a sibling that has high medical needs, and insurance doesn't cover all of those medical expenses. So if a family has, for a specific year, medical or dental expenses that were not covered by insurance, they may want to reach out to the college's financial aid office and present those unusual expenses and an explanation of them. And with the appropriate documentation, if the school feels it's warranted, we could make an adjustment to, say, adjusted gross income. So say the expenses that they paid out of pocket in 2019 were $5,000. Well, that's not reflective in their adjusted gross income that they reported on the FAFSA form. So if the school receives the appropriate documentation, we could reduce the adjusted gross income by the amount of the dental and medical expenses, and thereby, reduce the EFC and make the student eligible potentially for more financial aid. So these are just examples. I am sure over the years we've heard even more special circumstances, just encouraging families to reach out to the school's financial aid office and explain what's going on in their family that makes them different than what they reported on the FAFSA form. All right, shifting gears now, we will be talking about the different financial aid programs, starting with the federal aid programs, Pell, Teach, campus-based, and direct loans. So the federal Pell Grant for the current year, so for 2021, the maximum is $6,345 for full-time enrollment. The maximum expected family contribution to make a student Pell eligible increased to $5,711, and it has not yet been established for 21-22, and we don't know a predictor of what that will look like. So again, these are figures that we're using for our currently enrolled students. Students have a maximum number of terms that they can receive a federal Pell Grant, and it's 600% of an annual award amount or the equivalent of 12 full-time semesters. So if a student goes full-time every term they enroll, once they have gone 12 full-time semesters and received a federal Pell Grant award, they will have maxed out their lifetime eligibility for a Pell Grant. So we want students, we know students will enroll and not know exactly what they want to be when they grow up, and they won't exactly know what program they want to study, but we do want students to have the best plans as possible, because the more they change programs and have to take courses that weren't in other programs, they could max out on their Pell eligibility before they complete their first bachelor's degree. Students can now also attend year-round and receive a federal Pell Grant. So in the past, if a student went full-time fall and full-time spring and then wanted to enroll in the summer and use some of their Pell from that year, if they went full-time those first 2 terms, they would have exhausted that full amount for the year. Now students that go year-round can receive up to 150% of their annual award. So it gives them the opportunity to take on additional classes in the summer semester, for example, and gives them incentive to complete their degree sooner. However, they still only have 12 full-time semester limit. So if they start adding additional periods of time in which they enroll and receive Pell, they still will hit that maximum time frame of 12 full-time semesters. The TEACH grant is the Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education grant. Those are a lot of words. I think really federal government liked the term teach, and so they said, let's use that as the acronym and then figure out what words go with the TEACH grant. But it is an educational assistance grant to help students pay for their education if they are studying to be a public or private elementary or secondary school teacher. And they have to serve in a low income, if they serve low income families upon graduation, then they get to keep the grant. They commit to that when they accept the TEACH grant. If they don't comply with that requirement upon graduation, then that grant becomes an unsubsidized direct loan that they have to repay. So schools will participate in the TEACH grant program, but not all students are offered TEACH. They're usually sent information about TEACH, and then they have to reach out to the financial aid office to say, I'm interested in using the TEACH grant. So in concept, it's a great grant, but we want students to be aware that if they don't find a job serving low-income families, then that grant does become a loan that they have to pay back. Then there are the 2 campus-based programs. And so these are still federal programs, but they are allocated to the colleges and universities in a certain allocation of money each year. So not every school participates in SEOG and work study, but many of us do. But the amount that gets offered to a student can vary significantly between colleges and universities. And we didn't really talk yet about priority deadlines, but when it comes to filing the FAFSA form, we want students to submit their FAFSAs as early as possible. 1, so we can get award offers out to them as quickly as possible, but 2, because we have these smaller pots of money, these 2, for example, and then a lot of our institutional dollars. And we tend to award these funds to students who meet our financial aid priority deadlines or our priority processing dates. And so when students are looking to submit the FAFSA in October, we encourage them to reach out to their college's financial aid offices or their admissions representative and find out what is the FAFSA priority date for your institution, and get that FAFSA submitted by that school's priority date. So again, especially for incoming freshmen, the sooner you apply, the sooner we can get an award offer out to them so that they know and can compare the different offers. But also to maximize their aid eligibility, increase their opportunity to receive SEOG, work study, and certain institutional dollars, we want students to meet those priority deadline dates. For most schools, federal work study earnings are given as a paycheck and not applied directly to the student's bill. So even though they're offered work study on their financial aid offer, the student has to take action on applying for and being hired into a position that they then would earn that work study money, usually being paid on the same pay time frame as the colleges and universities. Federal work study is for undergraduate and graduate students, and employment may be on campus or off campus depending on the college or university. Um, Federal work study wages are excluded from the EFC calculation. So for students who worked under the federal work study program in 2020, when they file the FAFSA next year and they're reporting 2020 income and earnings, they will get to exclude back out of the process any money that they earned that was earned under the federal work study program. So it is financial aid and it does not count against them in future years. The Ohio minimum wage for 2020 is $8.70 an hour, and most colleges pay minimum wage or even higher. There is a difference between work study and work or employment on an award letter. And I haven't seen this very often, but we want to point this out that while it is rare, some schools will list an arbitrary work award. And the difference between work study and work or summer job is basically they're putting it out there as an estimate to say you should get a job for the summer and you could reduce the amount that you owe to the institution by the amount of money that you earn for the summer. So you may see summer income for $2,000, for example, on a award letter. So we just want to be cautious that the student understands the difference between work study and work or employment on their award offer. Students must work their maximum number of allowed hours in order to earn their full work study award. And as you saw on those award offers, we tend to take the award offers and break them out in semesters and then an annual offer. So take, for example, the student loan being $5,500 and split up between two terms, $2,750. That is how that fund will be dispersed to the student's bill. But for work study, if we offer them $4,000, in most cases, they can earn $4,000 throughout the whole year. So sometimes a student may earn all $4,000 of their work study money between summer and fall semester, and it's exhausted going into spring. So it isn't necessarily that they have to earn all of that money in the term in which it was allocated or bucketed on their award offer. And again, remembering that work study is in most cases not applied directly to the student's bill. So federal SEOG, or the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, is available only to undergraduate students with exceptional financial need. And so the law tells us that it has to go to Pell eligible students first with the lowest EFC. And most schools receive a pretty low funding amount for this. So we rarely award SEOG to students that are beyond Pell eligibility. And a lot of the times, I would bet it goes to those students with the zero family contribution. And while the awards can range from $100 to $4,000 for the year, it really depends on when the student applies and how much financial need they have and the funding policies at the institution. I don't know too many schools that offer a $4,000 SEOG award to a student. We tend to take that allocation of SEOG money and try to spread the wealth as much as we can and help as many students as we can, rather than giving them $4,000 of SEOG. Also, because they have to be Pell eligible in most cases to receive SEOG, they're already receiving Pell. We just want to give everybody an opportunity to receive as much federal grant money as we can. All right, shifting to student loans, the direct loans for undergraduate students for 2021, so that's our current year students. They are two separate loans, subsidized and unsubsidized loans. On the subsidized portion that a student is offered and accepts, interest is paid for them while they are in school. So if they borrow $3,500 for the year in a subsidized loan, and they enter a repayment on that $3,500, it is still $3,500. Then the interest begins to accrue when they graduate from high school. So it is deferred only during periods of half-time or more enrollment. So as long as they maintain enrollment of at least 6 hours or more at most schools, then that interest subsidy will continue. On the unsubsidized loan, The interest does accrue from the point of disbursement. And again, as I said earlier, we tend to divide the loan into payments, autumn semester and spring semester. So when the fall semester disbursement of $2,750 is sent to the school, interest starts accruing on that portion. It does not accrue on the second portion of that until it is dispersed to the school. But interest accrues while they're in school. Students are encouraged, if at all possible on those unsub loans, to make payments on that interest while they're in school if they can. There is no penalty for any early payments on these loans, so the student can work with their servicer to make payments on the interest while they're in school. The interest rate is fixed for both loans at 2.75% for this current year. So for students that are borrowing during the 2021 year, the interest changes every July 1st based on the 10-year Treasury note plus a 2.05% index. It is capped at 8.25%, so it will never be more each year than 8.25. But you can see this year's students are getting a pretty darn low interest rate on their student loans. So we tell students and parents, if you have to borrow, they are not the worst loans to borrow, and they don't have to make any payments on either the sub or the unsub loan while they're in school. They can defer principal and interest until they graduate or cease to be enrolled at least half time, and then enter repayment on those student loans. Also keep in mind, the student will see an award offer, for example, the $5,500 on their award letter, but the Department of Education or Federal Student Aid will take out an origination fee, which is usually about 1% of each disbursement. So even though it says $2,750, it's not exactly what hits the student's account. They take out that processing fee before they send the funds to the school. So the student will see a little bit less than $2,750 hit their account. So for 2021, the maximum amount a student can borrow hasn't changed. And actually, this hasn't changed in several years through federal student aid. So the maximum that a freshman can borrow overall in student loans is $5,500. And the maximum amount of that can be subsidized is $3,500. And then $2,000, if they choose to take out the additional amount, will be unsubsidized regardless of their need. So the student has to have unmet need in order to be offered a subsidized loan. And then the $2,000 of unsub loan. Each year that they're in school, the amount they can borrow increases, because the longer a student stays in school, the more likely they are to graduate and the more likely they are to pay back their student loans. If I didn't say it already, these are loans that are in the student's name and the student's name only. Never do parents become responsible for this loan. So if a student chooses to borrow, all they will do is ask the student for references. So if the student chooses not to pay back the loan, all they will do is try to contact mom and dad and say, do you know where student is? Because we want to work with them to pay back their student loan. They will never turn to the payment or to the parent to make a payment on the student loan. Undergraduate independent students and dependent students whose parents have been denied a parent loan may be able to increase that unsubsidized loan amount by $4,000 for freshmen and sophomores and $5,000 for juniors and seniors. So we will talk in a minute about Parent Plus loans, but for dependent students, the maximum, as we said, for a freshman is $5,500. But if the student needs additional funding and the parent applies for the parent loan and it is denied because it is based on credit, then we will be able to offer the student additional amount of unsubsidized loan in their name each year. And while most of you don't deal with graduate students specifically, we do put this in here that once a student graduates with their first bachelor's degree, they are no longer eligible for federal Pell Grant or federal SEOG. And so in most cases, graduate students will only be eligible for student loans and only unsubsidized loans, regardless of their unmet financial need. They are not offered subsidized loans. They can borrow because the cost of a master's degree program is typically higher than an undergrad degree. Graduate students can borrow up to $20,500 each year. So as we mentioned, these are loans that a student has to pay back. They're the only ones responsible for paying them back. And when students complete their program or cease to be enrolled at least half-time, the colleges and universities will report to their servicers that they borrowed loans and they're no longer employed, or they're no longer enrolled in college. And so the students will then enter repayment on their loans. And students will be automatically put into a standard repayment plan for repaying their loans, which will have them pay their loans off in 10 years or less. But students do have different options for repayment, and there are 4 different type of income-driven repayment plans, and the student has to opt into these. And we realize that you aren't dealing with this for the most part, but we want you to have a little bit of information should students be coming to you and asking about, should I borrow, shouldn't I borrow, what happens? But we want students to know that they can choose a different type of repayment plan. It will extend the amount of time that it takes to repay their loan, and they will pay more interest over time, but it may be more reasonable for them to pay a smaller payment at first, for example, and increase as their income increases. So we just want to make sure that students know that there are different types of repayment plans. These plans are designed to give students peace of mind related to the affordability of borrowing a student loan. And we'll talk to students and parents about the concern about going into debt before they've even turned 18 or 19 years old. And while it is a loan they have to repay, it is an investment in their future. And if they have to borrow, these are not the worst case scenarios or the worst loans to have to borrow. Under some of the loans, under this program, some of the borrowers may qualify for a forgiveness of their student loans if they have made 10 years worth of qualifying payments on their loan and they're employed full-time as a public service employee or in any non-profit employer. So this is just an opportunity for students once they've been making a payment for 10 years on their loans. They may be able to get some of their loans forgiven through this loan forgiveness program. All right, parents can borrow, as we mentioned, can apply for, I should say, a Parent Plus loan, which is a loan for undergraduate students for dependent students. So it's only parents of dependent students. The loan limit for their loan, unlike the student loan, is up to that cost of attendance minus any financial aid they were receiving. So if you went back and looked at one of those award offers and you saw the cost of attendance and you subtracted out how much financial aid the student is receiving, the parent can borrow the difference up to that difference in a Parent Plus loan. It is a loan in the parent's name and the parent's name only. So even though they are borrowing on behalf of a student, if the parent chooses not to pay back their student loan or their parent loan, the student never becomes responsible for the repayment of that loan. So we will talk to some parents who will say, I have an agreement that I'm going to go ahead and borrow this parent loan, but my son or daughter is going to pay it. That's between the parent and the student. That is not mandated by federal student aid in any way. The interest rate for the parent loan is also fixed and changes every July 1st based on the Treasury bill and is capped at 10.5%. So it's a little bit higher of a cap on the parent loan, and it is a higher interest rate currently for 2021 at 5.3%, but still not the worst case loan if you have to borrow. Typically, repayment begins within 60 days of a full disbursement of the loan. So if I borrow $5,000 for the whole year, once the $5,000 is fully dispersed, then typically repayment begins on that loan. But this family or the parent can opt to defer those payments while the student is in school. And again, I would encourage the parent, if they're going to defer payment, they might want to try to make payments on at least the interest to help reduce what those payments will be when they enter full repayment on the loan. In order for a parent to borrow a Parent Plus loan, they have to submit the FAFSA form. And we'll have some parents that will say, we're going to go ahead and do this and we just want the parent loan. We don't want the student loan. And that's their choice. The student can decline to take out the federal direct sub and unsub loan. But we do encourage parents to go that route first before doing the Parent Plus loan. All right, we're now going to transition from federal programs to the different types of state aid programs. So this is Ohio, not Ohio State University aid, but the state of Ohio aid programs. So the first one is the Ohio College Opportunity Grant, or OCOG. And so for those of you that are newer to the financial aid process, you will see that we love to use acronyms. So OCOG is the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. In order to be considered for OCOG, the student must file the FAFSA, they must be an Ohio resident, and they must attend an Ohio public university at a main campus, or a whole Ohio private nonprofit college or university, or attend an Ohio private for-profit institution. So the way that a student applies for OCOG is by submitting the FAFSA form, by saying that they are an Ohio resident, and by signing that FAFSA form. Part of that authorization in the FAFSA form is giving permission for federal student aid to send the FAFSA results to the state of Ohio. And then the state of Ohio works with all the colleges and universities that the student lists on the FAFSA form to determine if the student is eligible for OCOG if they attend one of these types of institutions. And we want to stress there that it is only for main campus institutions. So I work for Ohio State Newark, the regional campus. Students that attend the Newark campus aren't eligible for OCOG because our cost of attendance is lower on the regional campus than it is on the Columbus campus. And the same thing with two-year community colleges. Our cost of attendance is less than a four-year public main university. So they found that students who are at those institutions are Pell eligible in order to be OCOG eligible in most cases, don't need that additional OCOG funding. So the expected family contribution for OCOG is what is used to determine how much OCOG the student can be awarded. So the EFC eligibility range is 0 to 2190. So as I said a minute ago, they have to be basically Pell eligible or in Pell eligible EFC range in order to be considered for OCOG and have a maximum household income of $96,000. The award amount is prorated, just like with Pell, if a student does not go full time. And similar to Pell, students are limited to 10 semesters or 15 quarters of state need-based grant for the OCOG. They can receive this grant, however, if they are attending on a year-round basis, again, similar to the Pell grant. So this chart will show you, again, this is for 2021, so for our currently enrolled students. And if you see at the top there, community colleges and regional campuses get 0 amount if they attend one of those campuses. But if they attend a main campus of a public institution, you can see the full-time and then the prorated amount of OCOG. And if they attend a private nonprofit, a private for-profit, we also have a reciprocation, I shouldn't say we, but the state of Ohio has a reciprocation policy with Pennsylvania institutions because we're such a close, we're so close to the state of Pennsylvania that students often go into Pennsylvania. So if they're state of Ohio residents and they attend a Pennsylvania institution, these are the amounts that they could be eligible for. Based on the state budget, these amounts did not increase for 2021, and we don't know yet what to expect for 21-22. For eligible students, though, that are attending a community college or a regional campus that do go year-round, and they have exhausted their Pell Grant for the year, they may be eligible for some OCOG money for what is called third-term OCOG. Then there are foster youth at community colleges. So as I said a minute ago, if a student is attending a community college or a four-year regional campus, they're not eligible for OCOG. And the exception to that is if they are a qualified foster youth student attending one of those institutions, they may be eligible for OCOG because they don't have the same family support and tend to have greater need. So the statute requires that otherwise OCOG eligible students, their living expenses are to be added to their tuition and general fees to determine their OCOG amount. So if you are working with a foster youth coming out of high school, they need to work with their Ohio education and training person, their representative, about getting an Ohio education and training voucher that then lists how much they're eligible for OCOG, and they would bring to the community college so that we could award them their OCOG eligibility. So OCOG, I want to stress, the way the student applies for that is through the FAFSA form. These next state programs that I'm going to discuss are actually funds that the student usually has to have a FAFSA on file for, but they have to take specific action in order to apply for them. So there is a nurse education assistance loan program. So students that are working to be an RN or our graduate nurse faculty students can apply for this nurse education assistance loan program. Recipients have to serve as a full-time nurse in Ohio for 5 years to qualify then for 100% cancellation of this loan. So there's the benefit is it's giving them funding upfront to help pay for their education, but if they serve as a full-time nurse in Ohio for 5 years, they get to have their loan canceled. There is an Ohio War Orphan and Severely Disabled Veteran Scholarship through the state of Ohio, and it awards tuition assistance to children of deceased and severely disabled Ohio veterans who served in the armed forces during a declared war or conflict. So eligible students have to be attending a public institution, and they will receive 100% tuition and general fees, or if they're at a private institution for the current year, they can receive an annual award amount of $85.75. Students have to take action through the state of Ohio through their website and apply for this program. This is not something that the colleges and universities identify with the students. So if you're working with students that may qualify for this, have them look at the Ohio Department of Higher Education website for qualifications and application procedures. Then there is the Ohio National Guard Scholarship. Eligibility for this is determined by the Ohio Adjutant General. The current annual or full-time award is 100% of tuition general fees at Ohio public colleges and universities, or the equivalent amount of private institutions for a member of the ONG. So for approved private or proprietary degree granting institutions of higher education, the program will pay $11,016. So this is a great way for a student that just does not have enough funding to help pay for their education to get involved with the Ohio National Guard and have their college educational expenses paid for. Then there is the Safety Officer Memorial Scholarship, which is for dependents and spouses of safety officers that were killed in the line of duty, for a full-time award of 100% of tuition general fees at public universities, and at private and nonprofit, $84.51 for an annual amount for full-time. Then there is the Choose Ohio First scholarship program through the state of Ohio, and this is for various STEM concentrations, so the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. So if students are focused in those areas and their college participates in the Ohio Choose Ohio First scholarship program, then the student could receive some additional scholarship funding up to $5,000 a year for qualified educational expenses. And the website they would need to go to is the ohiohighered.org COF for Choose Ohio First, and they can look it up to see if their school participates in the Choose Ohio First scholarship program. Then there are the ETV, Ohio Education Training Voucher Program, which is a federally funded state administered program designed to help youth who were in the foster care program. So they can receive up to $5,000 a year for qualified expenses. They have to be a current or former foster student who was in foster care on their 18th birthday or aged out at that time, or they were in foster care, legal custody, or guardianship to a kinship caregiver at or after 16, or they were adopted from foster care with the adoption finalized after their 16th birthday, or foster care case was closed between the ages of 18 and 21. So again, if you're working with any of these students, have them reach out to Ohio Department of Higher Education to see if they can qualify for this type of funding. All right, we are now going to transition into the different type of resources that are available to you as counselors and access providers and to your parents. So first of all, we're going to talk about what OWASFA provides through FAFSA Help Ohio. And this is our website. And you can go out there under FAFSA Help Ohio. There are two different drop downs, one for FAFSA events and one that says resources for students and parents. Under the FAFSA events, that is where in a non-COVID environment, and even if you are still providing these, if you as counselors at your high school or in your access programs will still be providing some type of FAFSA assistance, FAFSA completion assistance, you can go to our FAFSA events link and add your FAFSA events that you are hosting. And that way that information is out there for parents and students to know that you are hosting a FAFSA completion workshop. We know that some of those won't be occurring because of the pandemic, but if you are doing anything like that, we ask you to go out to the FAFSA events link and add that out there. Under the resources for students and parents, we have provided several instructional videos that come from federal student aid that talk to them about how to apply for the FSA ID, how to complete the FAFSA form. Several different handouts out there. You can link this resource page right off of your school's website if you would like to do that. Then federal student aid provides several different resources at studentaid.gov, several different types of publications and fact sheets and online tools that you can use. Be careful if you're out there. You may see both years are out there, information for 2021 and 21-22. So if you're looking for documents and handouts for your current seniors, make sure you're looking for anything that is 21-22. In most cases, printed publications are no longer available from the U.S. Department of Education. So for those of you counselors who've been around for a while, where you used to go onto the website and ask for things to be printed and mailed to you, they're no longer doing that. But PDFs are still available. So you can electronically go out and get several of these different types of publications and fact sheets and download those and print those on your own. And we are wrapping up our high school counselor workshop, which you are attending right now. But if you want to hear this information again, you are welcome to register for the November 19th session. And then there is a December 9th session. So if you are speaking to any of your colleagues who have not had a chance to attend these workshops, please let them know that there are still 2 more available, and they can register at owasfa.org for either November 19th or December the 9th. We also want to let you know that even though we're in this unusual time of not being able to do very many in-person presentations, we, OWASFA, are still available to help you with your high school financial aid nights. And several of us, Vicki and I were just talking before we started this session, we are doing them virtually. So you can work with us through Request a Financial Aid Night presenter on the OWASFA website, and we will connect you with a presenter who will work with you to do a Zoom or a different type of virtual live presentation for your students and your parents. We also have added a pre-recorded session of a financial aid night that if you just want to download and put that link on your website and share that information with your families. So rather than organizing a live virtual session, you could share with them this financial aid pre-recorded session, and it includes the PowerPoint presentation. So even though we're in these unusual times, we still want to help you get the information about how important it is to file the FAFSA form and walk them through the steps of getting that FAFSA submitted. So please feel free to, again, go to our website, click on the Request a Financial Aid Night presenter link, and let us know what you need, and we will be happy to try to accommodate your needs for financial aid nights. We have a college access and school counselors contact database. It's not the most glamorous type of database, but we want to make sure that all of you are in our database so that as we have these different types of workshops and training and information to share with you, we have you in the database and can communicate with you. So if you don't know if you're in our database or you know you're not, go to the database at owasfa.org and sign up to be in there. Benefits are you get to get workshop registration information, counselor event announcements and details, as well as other training announcements. So we try to, be as proactive as we can at sharing this information with you, but we can only get it out to you if you are a part of our database. So please go out to OASFA.org and seek out the College Access and School Counselor Contact Database and make sure we have your information. Many other resources that are available on our website. The one we really want to point out to you today is I talked a little while ago about the different FAFSA priority deadlines for schools in the state of Ohio, and encouraging your students to make sure that their FAFSA is submitted by the school that they're looking at that has the earliest financial aid priority date. So we do a survey of all Ohio schools each year, and we put a spreadsheet out on the OASFA.org website, which will show you all of the different schools that responded to the survey, what their federal school code is, whether or not they use a FAFSA priority date, when they believe they will start sending out financial aid offers, if they require a supplemental form, such as the CSS profile form. And so this is really good information if you're sitting with a student and they want to know, when is Baldwin Wallace's FAFSA priority date? And you could pull up this spreadsheet and answer that question for them. So this is, again, out on the OASFA.org website that you can download and put on your website and share with your students so that they can look up, knowing what those priority dates are. That was a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. And Vicki, I've not seen any questions pop up in the chat, and you've not said that there are any out there. Am I correct in that?
You are correct. I don't see any questions as of right now. So you did an excellent job of explaining each thing. So that's good. We may have a lot of counselors out there who are, been through this before, so there weren't a lot of questions for it, but you did a great job of going in detail and explaining each slide and what's required for students and parents. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So if anyone has a question, I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and type it in the chat. You can also always email us at that OASFA outreach@oasfa.org website, or email address. We certainly welcome your questions, and we do get questions from counselors that are very specific to students. So you certainly can reach out and send us an email through that outreach@oasfa.org email address as you process through these times. At the time that you end your session here, you will be asked to complete a survey, and it will also be emailed to you in a post-event email. In order to plan for future workshops like these, we'd like to have your feedback and know if there's something else we should be providing to you, what can we do to enhance your training experience. So please take time to fill out these the evaluation form when it is sent to you. And we hope that you have a great year. We know that this is a challenging time for our seniors. I'm actually living it personally as I have a senior in high school myself. It is definitely different times for us, but if nothing else, we have band together to make this happen and be successful and get those students graduated from high school and into college with their financial aid in order. So please let us know how we can assist you in any way, and have a great afternoon. And again, thank you all for attending.
Thank you. There's no more questions, Faith.
All right, everyone have a great day. Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you, Faith. Have a good day.